to launch a dozen tiny little niche online businesses in markets like guinea pig care, pygmy goats, radon detection, Sudoku, and even body language. Each one was small, but together they added up to something like $30,000 a month in revenue. And he was able to profitably enter every new market he tried and limit his upfront risk to just a few $100s each time by figuring out what buckets exist in each market and then targeting each of those buckets in a slightly different way. I was intrigued. I decided for my next business I'd go into a market with zero chance of being a fad. I knew from my research that one of the oldest, longest-lasting hobbies in America was gardening. So I decided to find a niche to focus on within the gardening market and settled on Orchid Care. I got the idea because when we lived in China, we bought a bunch of orchids and they all died. I thought that if we had trouble, there were probably other people who had the same struggles. The market had all the right signs. People were searching for Orchid Care help on Google. There were books on Orchid Care on Amazon. So I decided to create a little website and send Google AdWords traffic straight to the best-selling Orchid Care ebook on ClickBank. I sold exactly 0 copies. I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. I was frustrated. And at this point, I was completely burnt out and almost ready to throw in the towel. But I went back to the drawing board one last time. When I chose the Orchid Care market, I figured it was a small enough, specific enough niche. But what I found, once again, was an almost exact repeat of the Scrabble tile market. I didn't have 1 bucket, I actually had 4. There were people who wanted to get their orchid to bloom again after it stopped flowering. People who wanted to save their sick or dying orchid. People who needed help potting or transplanting their orchids, and people who just bought their first orchid and needed to know the basics. And that's when I realized niching down is not enough. No matter how big or small your market is, you have to diagnose and prescribe to give people exactly what they want and need. What I mean by that is, just like a doctor, you need to ask for enough information before you can offer someone the right prescription. You need to identify what bucket someone falls into before you can give them the right advice or explain how your product can help. It made perfect sense. We do this naturally face-to-face, but almost nobody does this online. So I tried a little experiment. I began approaching each of the 4 buckets in the Orchid Care niche in a slightly different way. I asked people when they opted into my email list what their main interest was, and based on what they told me, I redirected them to different sales letters and sent them different email autoresponders. The result? I took that business from 0 to $25,000 a month in 18 months. Finally, it was the breakthrough I needed. And the best part? Once I set everything up, I didn't have to work that hard. People subscribed to our email list every single day. Sales kept coming in while we slept, and everything worked on autopilot. But I was worried it was just a fluke, and I was scared that the same thing that happened in the Scrabble market was going to happen again. So I decided to diversify into another market and use the same approach. This time I chose memory improvement to leverage my neuroscience background from Brown. We ended up launching a business called Rocket Memory, and it was an even bigger success. In fact, in the next 3 years, we 10x'd our income following the same process. And by the way, I didn't have a list or even experience in any of the markets that I entered. We started from scratch just like everybody does at some point. So don't worry if you don't have a list or even a product right now. That's exactly where I was when I got started. And the crazy thing is, despite all that success, there was still one more layer to the ask method I hadn't yet discovered, which took our income to an entirely new level.